in the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a charming stranger, Victor Langston, hides a dark secret. He's a master thief, stealing treasures like Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch and the vicarage's silver candelabra. But he's no match for Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster who spots his blue paint smudges and coded notes. With clever gossip and a fake diamond necklace, she sets a trap, catching him red-handed at Gossington Hall. Unmasked as the notorious Vincent Lyle, his web of crime unravels, proving no one outsmarts Miss Marple in her cozy village. Chapter 1. A stranger in St. Mary Mead. The little village of St. Mary Mead was as quiet as a Sunday afternoon. Tucked among green hills, its tidy cottages and winding lanes seemed to hum with a gentle peace. The church bells rang softly, and the smell of fresh bread floated from the bakery. Everyone knew everyone else, and secrets didn't stay secret for long. That's why, when a stranger rolled into town, the whole village buzzed like a beehive poked with a stick. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicks like tiny drumsticks. Her small cottage on High Street was cozy, with lace curtains and a crackling fire. From her window, she could see the post office, the butcher's shop, and the path to the vicarage. She liked watching the world go by, told her things, people's walks, their smiles, even the way they carried their shopping bags, spoke louder than words. And today, the village was whispering about someone new. Cherry. Miss Marple called to her maid, a cheerful young woman with a quick smile. What's all this chatter about a new face in the village? Cherry Baker popped her head out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Oh, Miss Marple, it's all anyone's talking about. A man named Victor Langston moved into Rose Cottage, the one by the meadow, came in a shiny car. He did, with fancy suitcases. Mrs. Price at the post office says he's an art dealer, retired, and ever so rich. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her glasses. An art dealer, you say, in St. Mary Mead? How curious. She picked up her knitting again, her mind already turning like a well-oiled clock. Rich strangers didn't often come to their sleepy village. When they did, they brought stories in, sometimes trouble. By noon, Miss Marple decided to take a stroll. She put on her best hat, a soft gray one with a tiny feather, and grabbed her walking stick. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched under her shoes as she walked toward the vicar's wife. Mrs. Clement was hosting tea, and Miss Marple never missed a chance to hear the village gossip. Gossip, she thought, was like the loose threads in her knitting pole. One, and you might unravel a whole sweater. The garden was bright with autumn flowers, and a small group of women sat around a table under an oak tree. Mrs. Bantry, a lively woman with a loud laugh, was there, along with Mrs. Price from the post office and young Miss Hartnell, who loved to talk. The table was set with a teapot, scones, and jam, and the air smelled sweet. There you are, Jane. Mrs. Bantry waved, her red scarf flapping. You've heard about the new man, haven't you? Victor Langston's such a gentleman. He stopped by Gossington Hall yesterday to say hello. So polite, and those suits. Straight out of London, I'd say. Miss Marple smiled and settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. He sounds quite the character. Tell me more. Mrs. Price leaned forward, her eyes wide. He's got a fancy way of talking, like he's been everywhere. Says he dealt in paintings and statues, sold them to dukes and lords. Now he wants a quiet life, he says, but quiet. In St. Mary Mead, I told him, nothing stays quiet here for long. The women laughed, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes scanning the garden. A quiet life. People who wanted quiet didn't wear fancy suits or drive shiny cars. They didn't move to a village where everyone watched your every step. She thought of old Mr. Tompkins, a shopkeeper from years ago, who smiled too much and cheated on the scales. Charm, she knew, could hide all sorts of mischief. As the tea party went on, Miss Hartnell chimed in. He's rented Rose Cottage for a year, paid in full, cash. Mr. Weatherby at the bank said so. And he's got a fancy way with words. Told me about a painting he sold to a prince once. I reckon he's got stories to fill a book. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers smoothing her shawl. A man who paid in cash and talked of princes was worth watching. She remembered a young man from her nephew Raymond's London days, all charm and no substance, who turned out to be selling fake watches. Langston's polish reminded her of that. The conversation turned to the upcoming village fete, a big event at Gossington Hall, Mrs. Bantry's grand home. Mr. Langston's promised to help with the auction, Mrs. Bantry said, her eyes bright. Says he knows all about valuing old trinkets. Might raise us a pretty penny for the church roof. Very generous, Miss Marple said softly, but her mind was ticking. Generous strangers often wanted something in return. She made a note to attend the fete and keep an eye on this, Mr. Langston thought as she walked home. The village was alive with its usual hum. Children played by the duck pond, and Mr. Green, the butcher, waved from his shop door. But Miss Marple's thoughts were on the stranger. She passed Rose Cottage, its windows gleaming, and spotted a sleek black car parked outside. A man stepped out tall, with dark hair slicked back, and a suit that looked too sharp for St. Mary Mead. He carried a leather case and glanced around, his smile quick and bright. Miss Marple paused behind a hedge, pretending to admire a rosebush. She noticed a smudge of blue paint on his cuff. Odd for a man so neat. It reminded her of a painter in the village years ago who used paint to cover stolen goods. A small thing, but Miss Marple never ignored small things. Back home, Cherry was bustling about, setting out supper. Saw him, did you? Cherry asked, grinning. Handsome, isn't he? Like a film star. Handsome is as handsome does, Miss Marple said with a chuckle. She sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap, but her eyes were sharp. Victor Langston was a puzzle, and she loved puzzles. His charm, his cash, his stories, they didn't add up. She thought of the village grocer who'd once slipped extra sugar into her bag, only to be caught stealing from the till. People who seemed too good to be true often were. That evening, Miss Marple's nephew, Raymond West, called from London. Aunt Jane, heard you've got a new neighbor, he said, his voice crackling through the phone. Some big-shot art dealer. What's he like? Too early to say, Miss Marple replied, her tone light but her mind heavy. But I'll be at the fete, Raymond. I expect I'll learn more there. The fete was 2 days away, and the village was already hanging bunting and baking cakes. Miss Marple knew it would be the perfect place to watch Mr. Langston. Crowds made people careless, and careless people dropped clues. She thought of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch, a family treasure she'd shown off last summer. It was the kind of thing an art dealer might notice. Miss Marple's fingers paused on her knitting. She'd seen men like Langston before, smooth talkers with sticky fingers. If he was up to no good, she'd find out. As the sun set, St. Mary Mead glowed gold, its peace unbroken. But Miss Marple knew peace was fragile. She'd keep her eyes open, her ears sharp, and her knitting needles busy. Victor Langston might think he could charm a quiet village, but he didn't know Miss Marple. Chapter 2. The Stolen Heirloom. The morning of the village fete dawned bright and clear, with St. Mary Mead buzzing like a fairground. Gossington Hall, Mrs. Bantry's grand old house, stood at the edge of the village, its lawns dotted with colorful stalls. Flags flapped in the breeze, and the smell of fresh scones and candy floss filled the air. Children ran about, clutching balloons, while the grown-ups chatted over cups of tea. It was the kind of day when nothing seemed to go wrong until it did. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly through the fete, her gray hat tilted just so, her walking stick tapping the grass. She wore her best blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. She nodded at Mr. Green, the butcher, who was selling sausages, and smiled at young Tommy, who was trying to win a teddy bear at the ring toss. But her mind was on Victor Langston, the new man in the village, who'd been the talk of every tea table since he arrived. Mrs. Bantry had put Langston in charge of the auction stall, where villagers donated old trinkets to raise money for the church roof. Miss Marple made her way there, weaving through the crowd. The stall was piled with odds and ends to cups, silver spoons, a dusty clock. Langston stood behind it, his dark hair slicked back, his smile as bright as his polished shoes. He was chatting with Miss Hartnell, who was waving a locket she'd donated. "Such a fine piece," Langston said, his voice smooth as honey. "This locket could fetch a good price, Miss Hartnell. You've got an eye for treasure." Miss Hartnell blushed, and Miss Marple's lips twitched. She remembered a traveling salesman who'd charmed the village years ago, selling fake gold rings. Langston's flattery had the same ring to it. She pretended to browse the stall, picking up a chipped teacup. Her eyes flicked like hands-long fingers, quick and clever, with that same smudge of blue paint on his cuff she'd noticed before. Odd, she thought, for a man who claimed to deal in art, not make it. Miss Marple. Mrs. Bantry bustled over, her red scarf flapping. "Isn't this a splendid day? And Mr. Langston's doing wonders with the auction. He says we might raise £50. "Very impressive," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. She glanced at Mrs. Bantry's dress, where a sapphire brooch usually sparkled. It wasn't there. "Dolly, where's your lovely brooch? The one your aunt left you?" Mrs. Bantry's hand flew to her collar. "Oh, I pinned it on this morning. I must have lost it in the rush. It's a family heirloom. Jane solid gold, with a sapphire as big as a robin's egg. I'll be heartbroken if it's gone." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "When did you last see it?" Mrs. Bantry frowned. "At the tea stall, I think. I was helping Mrs. Clement pour cups, and it was pinned right here." She patted her dress. Maybe it fell off in the grass. The fate carried on, but a shadow hung over Mrs. Bantry. She called over Inspector Slack, the local policeman, who was munching a scone nearby. He was a gruff man, not fond of mysteries, but he listened as Mrs. Bantry explained. "We'll search the grounds," he said, brushing crumbs off his jacket. "Probably just slipped off. These things happen." Miss Marple didn't think so. Brooches like that didn't just slip off. She remembered a maid in the village years ago, accused of stealing a ring that turned up in a pawnbroker's shop. Things didn't vanish, they were taken. She kept quiet, though, and joined the search, her eyes scanning the grass and the faces around her. By afternoon, the brooch was still missing, and whispers spread like wildfire. The tea stall was crowded with helpers, Mrs. Clement, Miss Hartnell, young Ellen, the maid, and even Langston, who'd stopped by to charm the ladies. Inspector Slack questioned Ellen, who'd been pouring tea near Mrs. Bantry. Ellen was a shy girl, barely 16, with red cheeks and nervous hands. "I didn't take it, sir," Ellen said, her voice wobbly. "I was just pouring tea, honest." Now, Inspector Slack said, his tone sharp. "You were right there, girl. If you know something, speak up." Miss Marple watched from a distance, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Ellen looked scared, but not guilty. Miss Marple's mind went to Langston, who'd been at the tea stall too, laughing and handing out cups. She remembered that blue paint on his cuff. It wasn't just odd, it was out of place, like a fox in a hen house. She wandered back to the auction stall, where Langston was now packing up. The crowd had thinned, and he was alone, sorting trinkets into a leather case. Miss Marple picked up a brass candlestick, pretending to admire it. "You've done well today, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice sweet as sugar. "Such a knack for spotting treasures." Langston flashed his bright smile. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Just a little hobby of mine, spotting what's valuable. Shame about Mrs. Bantry's brooch, though. Nasty business." "Very nasty," Miss Marple agreed. She noticed his leather case had a faint blue smudge on the handle, like the paint on his cuff. Her heart gave a little jump, but her face stayed calm. "I suppose you've seen plenty of jewels in your time. Any idea where a brooch like that might turn up?" Langston's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to her, quick as a cat. "Oh, lost things have a way of turning up. Maybe it's in the grass, or maybe someone picked it up by mistake." "Maybe," Miss Marple said, setting down the candlestick. She thought of a village boy who'd once found a lost watch, only to sell it for pocket money. Mistakes, she knew, were sometimes planned. As the fate wound down, the village was abuzz with talk of the theft. Poor Ellen was the main suspect. Thanks to Inspector Slack's heavy-handed questions, Mrs. Bantry was near tears. pacing the lawn of Gossington Hall. "It's not just a brooch, Jane," she said, clutching Miss Marple's arm. "It's the idea of someone stealing it right under our noses. In St. Mary Mead, of all places." Miss Marple patted her friend's hand. "Don't you worry, Dolly. Things have a way of coming to light." She didn't say more, but her mind was racing. She thought of Langston's smooth talk, his quick hands, that blue paint. It reminded her of a story Sir Henry Clithering, the old Scotland Yard man, once told her about a thief who marked stolen goods with paint to track them. Langston wasn't just a charming stranger. He was clever, maybe too clever. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. Cherry brought her a cup of tea, her face full of gossip. "They're saying Ellen took the brooch." Miss Marple, poor things, crying her eyes out. "Do you think she did it?" Miss Marple shook her head. "Ellen's no thief, Cherry. She's just in the wrong place at the wrong time." She sipped her tea, her eyes far away. She thought of Langston at the tea stall, so close to Mrs. Bantry, his hands moving fast as he handed out cups. A brooch like that, gold and sapphire, would tempt a man who knew its value. And Langston, with his talk of dukes and paintings, knew value better than most. Before bed, Miss Marple took out her notebook, a little thing she kept for puzzles. She wrote, "Blue paint, leather case, too charming." She thought of the fate, the crowd, the chaos perfect for a thief to slip a brooch into a pocket. But Langston wouldn't keep it, she guessed. A man like that would have a plan, a place to hide things, maybe even a buyer waiting. As the village settled into the night, St. Mary Mead seemed peaceful again, but Miss Marple knew better. The fate had stirred up more than dusted, had brought a thief into the open. She'd watch Mr. Langston, and she'd listen. The brooch was just the start. She felt it in her bones, like the time Mrs. Hodges' silver spoon went missing, only to turn up in a peddler's cart. This mystery would unravel, and Miss Marple would be there, knitting and watching when it did. Chapter 3. The Mastermind's Facade. The sun shone brightly over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm glow on the village green where the charity auction was set to take place. The theft of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch at the fete 2 days ago still hung over the village like a gray cloud. Whispers followed poor Ellen, the maid, though Miss Jane Marple was certain the girl was innocent. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Victor Langston, the charming newcomer who'd taken up residence in Rose Cottage. Today, he was running the auction, and Miss Marple planned to watch him like a hawk. She sat on a wooden bench near the green, her knitting bag at her side, her gray hat shielding her eyes from the sun. The village was bustling. Stalls sold jam and cakes, children darted about, and the vicar, Mr. Clement, fussed over a megaphone. Langston stood at the center of it all, behind a table piled with donated treasures, old vases, silver trays, a brass clock that ticked too loudly. His suit was crisp, his smile wide, and his voice carried like a stage actor's. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langston called, holding up a silver locket. "This fine piece, donated by Miss Hartnell, could grace a queen's neck. Shall we start at £5? The crowd clapped, and Miss Hartnell blushed pink as a peony. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, but her eyes never left Langston. He moved with ease, charming bids out of villagers like a piper leading mice. She remembered a fairground man from her childhood, all smiles and quick hands, who'd sold magic tonics that were just sugar water. Langston's polish was the same, too perfect, too practiced. Her nephew, Raymond West, had arrived from London that morning, eager for village gossip. He sat beside her now, his tweed jacket a bit too city for St. Mary Mead. "Aunt Jane," he said, grinning, "this Langston fellow's quite the showman. You think he's up to something?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "I think, Raymond, that a man who knows so much about treasures might know too much about taking them." She glanced at Langston, who was now holding up a chipped teapot, calling it a rare antique. The crowd ate it up, but Miss Marple noticed his fingers, quick, clever, and still smudged with that faint blue paint she'd seen twice before. The auction went on, raising pounds for the church roof. Langston was a marvel, coaxing bids from even the stingiest villagers. Mrs. Price bid £10 on a dusty painting, and Mr. Green, the butcher, bought a silver spoon for his wife. Miss Marple watched Langston's leather case, tucked under the table, where he stashed the auction money. That blue smudge was on the handle again, like a fingerprint he couldn't wash off. Raymond leaned close. "You're awfully quiet, Aunt Jane. Got a theory about that brooch?" "Not yet," she said, her voice soft, "but I'm watching. Things have a way of showing themselves, like weeds in a garden." She thought of the brooch, gold and sapphire, too fine to lose by accident. She also thought of Langston at the fete, so close to Mrs. Bantry at the tea stall, his hands moving fast. A man like that didn't miss details. War chances. As the auction ended, the crowd cheered, and Langston bowed, his smile dazzling. Mrs. Bantry rushed over, her red scarf flapping. "Mr. Langston, you've raised £70. The church roof's saved, thanks to you." "Happy to help," Langston said, his eyes twinkling. But Miss Marple caught a flicker in his face, a quick glance at his leather case, like a fox checking its den. She remembered a village conman, years back, who'd organized a raffle only to pocket half the cash. Charm was a mask, and Langston wore it well. Raymond nudged her. "Come on, Aunt Jane, let's meet this fellow. I want to see what's got you so curious." He stood, pulling her toward the auction table. Miss Marple followed, her walking stick, tapping the grass. She didn't like drawing attention, but Raymond's boldness might shake something loose. "Mr. Langston," Raymond said, sticking out his hand. "I'm Raymond West, Miss Marple's nephew. Fine show you put on. Ever thought of the stage?" Langston laughed, shaking Raymond's hand. "Just a hobby, Mr. West. I've spent years valuing art paintings, jewels, the lot. Auctions are a bit of fun." His eyes slid to Miss Marple, and she gave him her sweetest smile, the one she used when she wanted people to think she was just a harmless old lady. "You must know a lot about jewels," she said, her voice light. "Mrs. Bantry's brooch, for instance. Such a shame it's gone. A sapphire like that would catch an expert's eye, wouldn't it?" Langston's smile stayed, but his fingers tightened on his case. "Oh yes, a fine piece. Likely it's just lost in the grass. These things turn up." He turned to help Mrs. Clement with the auction tally. But Miss Marple saw his jaw twitch, just for a second. Raymond raised an eyebrow as they walked away. "You're poking him, Aunt Jane. Think he's the thief?" "I think," she said, "he's a man who knows more than he says. Like that grocer's boy who swore he never touched the till, but his pockets were full of pennies." She glanced back at Langston, who was now chatting with the vicar, his laugh too loud. That blue paint, she thought. It wasn't just a smudge, it was a clue. Like the chalk marks a burglar once left on village gates. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap. Cherry, her maid, bustled in with tea. "Heard the auction was a hit, Miss Marple. That Mr. Langston's a proper gent, isn't he? Raised all that money." "Very generous," Miss Marple said, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of Langston's quick hands, his leather case, that paint. She remembered a story from Sir Henry Clithering, the old Scotland Yard man, about a thief who marked stolen goods with paint to track them in a gang. Langston wasn't working alone, she guessed. A man like that had plans bigger than a village fete. Raymond sprawled in an armchair, sipping tea. "You're onto something, Aunt Jane, I can tell. What's that brain of yours cooking up?" She smiled, her needles clicking. "Just thinking, Raymond, about people who seem too good to be true. Like that actress in your London play, all smiles, until she ran off with the ticket money." Raymond laughed. "You never forget a story, do you? All right, I'll help. What do we do next?" "Watch," Miss Marple said simply, "and listen. The village talks, and I hear things. Mr. Langston's made a splash, but splashes leave ripples." She thought of the fete, the brooch, the auction. Langston was everywhere, always smiling, always watching. A man like that didn't come to St. Mary Mead for peace, he came for profit. That evening, Cherry came back from the shops, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, you'll never guess. Mrs. Price says Mr. Langston was asking about old families in the village once. with heirlooms, like Mrs. Bantry's brooch. Said he's writing a book about antiques. A book, Miss Marple murmured. She didn't believe it. Men like Langston didn't write books, they spun stories. She thought of Mrs. Bantry's brooch, and now this talk of heirlooms. Langston was fishing, and not for fish. She opened her notebook and wrote, asking about heirlooms. Blue paint, too curious. The pieces were falling into place, like a jigsaw puzzle she'd done 100 times. As night fell, St. Mary Mead settled into its quiet rhythm. The church bells rang, and the stars winked above the cottages. But Miss Marple didn't sleep. She sat by a window, her knitting untouched, her mind racing. Victor Langston was a puzzle, and she was good at puzzles. He thought he could outsmart a sleepy village, but he didn't know Miss Marple. She'd seen his kind before, smooth talkers with sticky fingers. The brooch was just the start, and she'd be ready for whatever came next. Chapter 4. A Web of Deception. The quiet of St. Mary Mead was shattered again, just days after the village fete. The theft of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch still had tongues wagging, and poor Ellen, the maid, was avoiding the shops to escape the whispers. Miss Jane Marple, however, was certain the girl was innocent. Her sharp eyes were fixed on Victor Langston, the charming art dealer who'd swept into the village like a summer breeze. His polished suits and bright smiles didn't fool her. She'd seen his kind before. And trouble followed them like a shadow. It was a chilly morning when the next shock hit. Miss Marple was sipping tea in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly, when Cherry, her maid, burst in, her cheeks pink from running. Miss Marple, you won't believe it. Someone's stolen the silver candelabra from the vicarage. Mrs. Clements, in her States, says it's been in her family for years. Miss Marple set down her teacup, her eyes narrowing. The candelabra, the one on the vicarage dining table. She remembered it well, heavy silver, carved with roses, gleaming under the chandelier. It was no trinket to lose in the grass. Cherry nodded, her apron twisted in her hands. Gone last night. They reckon the vicar noticed it missing this morning. Inspector Slack's there now, asking questions. He's got his eye on Ellen again. Poor thing. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Poor Ellen indeed. That man's as stubborn as a mule. She thought of Inspector Slack, all bluster and no imagination, pinning every crime on the easiest target. But her mind was on Langston's quick hands, that blue paint on his cuff, his questions about village heirlooms. 2 thefts in a week, both valuable, both under everyone's noses. Coincidence? Miss Marple didn't believe in coincidences. She put on her gray coat and hat, grabbed her walking stick, and headed to the vicarage. The village was abuzz, with knots of people whispering outside the post office and bakery. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, waved her over. Jane, it's awful. First Dolly's brooch, now the vicar's candelabra. We've got a thief in St. Mary Mead. So it seems, Miss Marple said, her voice calm. Was anyone at the vicarage last night? Mrs. Price leaned close, her voice low. Just the usual lot for the choir, meeting Mrs. Bantry, Miss Hartnell, Mr. Langston, and a few others. Oh, and Ellen, serving tea. That's why Slack's after her again. Miss Marple nodded, her mind ticking like a clock. Langston had been there. Of course he had. She remembered a village card game years ago, when a sly player pocketed coins while everyone laughed. Thieves thrived in crowds, and Langston seemed to be everywhere crowds gathered, at the vicarage. Mrs. Clement was wringing her hands, her eyes red. Inspector Slack stood in the dining room, scribbling in his notebook. The table, where the candelabra once stood, looked bare, like a smile missing a tooth. Ellen hovered in the corner, her face pale. Miss Marple, Mrs. Clement said, rushing over. It's dreadful. That candelabra was my grandmother's. Who would do such a thing? Someone bold, Miss Marple said softly. She glanced at Slack, who was barking questions at Ellen. Inspector, have you checked the windows? Any signs of a break-in? Slack grunted. Windows locked, doors too. No forced entry. Looks like an inside job to me. He glared at Ellen, who shrank back. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room. The candelabra was heavy, too big to slip into a pocket unnoticed. She thought of Langston at the fete, his hands quick as a magician's. A man like that could hide things. Maybe in that leather case he always carried. She remembered the blue smudge on its handle, matching the paint on his cuff. It wasn't just paint, it was a mark, like the chalk a poacher once used to signal his gang. Mrs. Clement, Miss Marple said, who was near the table last night. Mrs. Clement frowned. Well, we were all milling about tea biscuits, choir plans. Mr. Langston was helping move chairs. He's so kind, always offering a hand. Very kind, Miss Marple murmured. Too kind, she thought. She recalled a village handyman who'd fix doors while casing houses for theft. Kindness was a perfect disguise. She stepped outside, pretending to admire the vicarage roses. The garden path led to the lane by Rose Cottage, Langston's rented home. As she lingered, Cherry caught up, her eyes wide. Miss Marple, I forgot to tell you, I saw Mr. Langston last night, walking late near the vicarage. I was coming back from the shops, and there he was, near the hedge, looking sneaky. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. Sneaky, you say? What time was this, Cherry? Past 10, dark as anything. He had a torch, like he was searching for something. Gave me the creeps. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A late-night walk by the vicarage. Hours after the choir meeting, she thought of a story. Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Scotland Yard man, once told her about a thief who scouted houses at night, marking them for later. Langston wasn't just charming, he was careful, planning his moves like a chess player. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. Raymond West, her nephew, was still visiting, sprawled in an armchair with a newspaper. Another theft, Aunt Jane, he said, grinning. This village is livelier than London. Bet you've got a theory. I've got eyes, Raymond, she said, her voice sharp, and they see a pattern. 2 thefts, both treasures, both when Mr. Langston was nearby. That's no accident. Raymond sat up. You think he's a crook? He's got the whole village eating out of his hand. So did Mr. Hodge, the grocer, until we found his secret ledger. Miss Marple said. She thought of Langston's leather case, the blue paint, his late-night walk. He's not just a thief, Raymond, he's clever. But clever people make mistakes. They think they're smarter than everyone else. She opened her notebook and wrote, Candelabra stolen. Langston at vicarage, late-night walk. Blue paint. The pieces were piling up, like yarn in a basket. She remembered Mrs. Bantry's brooch, gone from the fete where Langston lingered. Now the candelabra, taken from a room he'd been in. And those questions about heirlooms, as Mrs. Price had said. He was hunting, she was sure, and not just for antiques. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk past Rose Cottage. The sleek black car was parked outside, and Langston was in the garden, clipping hedges with a pair of shears. He waved, his smile as bright as ever. Miss Marple, enjoying the fine day? Very much, she said, pausing by the gate. You've settled in nicely, Mr. Langston. Keeping busy, I see. Oh, always, he said, wiping his brow. A quiet village keeps a man on his toes. His leather case sat on a garden bench, that blue smudge still there. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on it, but she kept her face sweet and simple. As she walked away, she thought of a village dance years ago, where a dashing stranger lifted purses while twirling ladies on the floor. Langston was dancing, too charming the village, while his hands worked in the shadows. But shadows left traces, and Miss Marple was good at finding them. That evening, she called Sir Henry Clithering, her old friend from Scotland Yard. His voice crackled through the phone. Jane, what's this about a thief in St. Mary Mead? Your village is getting lively. Too lively, she said. Henry, tell me about thieves who mark their goods. Paint, perhaps. Sir Henry chuckled. You've got a nose for trouble. Yes, some thieves use paint blue, red, whatever to mark stolen items for their buyers. Saw a case in London once. A gang using blue smudges to track jewels. Why? Got a suspect. Not yet, Miss Marple said, but her mind was made up. Langston wasn't just a thief, he was spinning a web, and St. Mary Mead was caught in it. She'd need to be careful, but she'd need to be quick, too. Another theft might come soon, and she wouldn't let him slip away. As the village slept, Miss Marple sat by her window. Her knitting needles still the stars twinkled over St. Mary Mead, but her thoughts were on Langston's smile, his case, his paint. He thought he was the spider, weaving his trap, but Miss Marple knew spiders could be caught, and she was already spinning a web of her own. Chapter 5. The clue in the garden. The air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, with autumn leaves carpeting the lanes of the sleepy village. The thefts of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch and the vicarage's silver candelabra had set tongues wagging, and the villagers were jumpy, locking doors that usually stayed open. Miss Jane Marple, however, was calm as ever, her sharp mind piecing together a puzzle that grew clearer by the day. Victor Langston, the charming art dealer in Rose Cottage, was at the heart of it, she was sure. His polished smiles, quick hands, and that curious blue paint on his cuff were threads in a web she was determined to unravel. It was a quiet morning when Miss Marple stepped into her garden, her gray shawl wrapped tight against the chill. She loved her roses, their petals bright despite the season, and she often found clarity among them. As she bent to clip a faded bloom, her eyes caught something odd near the hedge, a scrap of paper, half buried in the dirt. She knelt, her knees creaking, and picked it up with her gardening gloves. It was small, torn, and smudged with mud, but she could make out numbers scribbled in black ink: 14 to 3, 27 to 8, 9 to 1. No names, no words, just numbers, like a code. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. She tucked the paper into a pocket and glanced toward the lane. Her cottage was close to the vicarage, and the hedge ran along the path to Rose Cottage, where Langston lived. She thought of Cherry's story about seeing him near the vicarage at night, his torch bobbing like a firefly. This paper, she guessed, hadn't blown in by chance. It was a clue, dropped by someone careless or in a hurry. Back inside, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, and studied the scrap. The numbers reminded her of a village ledger from years ago, when a shopkeeper used codes to hide his shady deals. A list, perhaps, she murmured, her eyes narrowing. A list of what? Stolen goods. Buyers. She thought of the brooch, the candelabra, and Langston's leather case, always close by, marked with that blue smudge. He wasn't just a thief, she decided. He was running a scheme, something bigger than St. Mary Mead. Her nephew, Raymond West, was still visiting, lounging in her armchair, with a book. "Aunt Jane, you look like a cat with a mouse," he said, grinning. "What's that paper?" "A puzzle, Raymond," she said, holding it up. "Found it in the garden, near the vicarage path. Numbers, no meaning yet, but I think our Mr. Langston knows more about puzzles than he lets on." Raymond took the paper, squinting at the numbers. "Looks like gibberish. You think it's his?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that careful men make careless mistakes, like the postman who dropped a letter that wasn't his, and we found he'd been selling secrets." She thought of Langston's late-night walk, his torch, his questions about heirlooms. The paper was a thread, and she'd pull it until the whole cloth unraveled. That afternoon, she called Sir Henry Clithering, her old friend from Scotland Yard. His voice crackled through the phone, warm and amused. "Jane, you're stirring up trouble again, aren't you?" "What's this about a paper?" She described the scrap, the numbers, and Langston's behavior, his charm, the blue paint, his presence at both thefts. "Henry, you told me once about thieves using codes. Could this be one?" Sir Henry's tone turned serious. "Sounds like a tally sheet. I saw a case in London. A gang used numbers to track stolen goods, like catalog numbers for their buyers. Blue paint, you say? That's a marker, Jane. Thieves use it to signal what's theirs, or where it's going. Your man sounds like a professional, not a village pickpocket." Miss Marple nodded, though he couldn't see. "That's what I feared. He's too smooth, Henry, like that lawyer who swindled half the county with fake wills. But he's in St. Mary Mead, and I'll find his mistake." Sir Henry chuckled. "If anyone can, it's you. Keep me posted, Jane, and be careful. Don't like being caught." She hung up, her mind racing. A tally sheet, the numbers 14 to 3, 27 to 8, 9 to 1 could be items, dates, or even prices. She thought of the brooch and candelabra, both valuable, both gone when Langston was near, and his questions about heirlooms, as Mrs. Price had said he was hunting, picking his targets like a fox in a henhouse. She took a walk to clear her head, her walking stick tapping the lane. The village was quiet, but gossip hummed like bees. At the post office, Mrs. Price was sweeping the step. Miss Marple, any news on the candelabra? Poor Mrs. Clements, beside herself. Nothing yet, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. But tell me, has Mr. Langston been in asking about anything special? Mrs. Price's eyes lit up. Funny you ask. He was here yesterday, wanting names of folks with old silver or jewels. Said it's for his book on antiques. I told him about Mrs. Bantry's brooch, and he looked mighty interested. Miss Marple's lips twitched. A book, indeed. She remembered a peddler who'd claimed to collect family stories while scoping out houses to rob. Langston's book was a cover, she was sure, for mapping the village's treasures. As she passed Rose Cottage, she saw Langston in his garden, polishing that sleek black car. His leather case sat on the grass, the blue smudge clear in the sunlight. He waved, his smile as bright as ever. Miss Marple out for a stroll, just enjoying the air, she said, pausing. You've settled in so well, Mr. Langston. Must be hard, though, leaving the excitement of art dealing for our little village. Oh, I like the quiet, he said, but his eyes flicked to his case, quick as a blink. Plenty to keep me busy here. I'm sure, Miss Marple said. Sweetly, she noticed a tiny speck of blue paint on his shoe, fresh and bright. Her heart skipped, but her face stayed calm. Paint, numbers. Heirloom Langston was weaving a web, and she was catching the strands. Back home, Jerry was dusting, chattering about the village. Miss Marple, they're still blaming Ellen for the candelabra. Inspector Slacks been at the vicarage all morning, making her cry. Miss Marple sighed. Slacks barking up the wrong tree. Cherry. Ellen's no more a thief than I am. She thought of Langston's late-night walk, the paper in her garden, the paint. He was bold, moving under the village's nose, but boldness made mistakes. She remembered a village boy who'd stolen apples, caught because he left a trail of course. Langston's trail was forming, and she'd follow it. That evening, Raymond sprawled in her armchair, sipping tea. Aunt Jane, you're like a bloodhound. That paper's got you hooked, hasn't it? What's your next move? Watch and wait, she said, her needles clicking. Mr. Langston thinks he's clever, but clever men trip over their own feet, like that banker who thought he'd hidden his fraud, but his ledger gave him away. She showed Raymond the paper, the numbers stark against the smudged page. This is his ledger, I think. A list of what he's taken or what he plans to take. Raymond whistled. You're building a case, Aunt Jane. Want me to poke around? I could ask in London, see if anyone knows of Victor Langston in the art world. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. That's a fine idea, Raymond. But be discreet. Spiders don't like their webs shaken. She thought of Langston's smile, his quick glances, his paint. He was no ordinary thief. He was a master, with a plan bigger than a brooch or candelabra. But masters fell, and she'd help him trip. As night fell, St. Mary Mead glowed under the stars, its cottages snug and quiet. But Miss Marple didn't sleep. She sat by her window, the scrap of paper in her hand, her mind spinning. The numbers were a key, and Langston was the lock. She'd turn it soon, she knew, and the village would sleep easier when she did. For now, she'd watch, listen, and knit waiting for the spider to tangle in his own web. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The village of St. Mary Mead hummed with its usual quiet charm, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. The thefts of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch and the vicarage's silver candelabra had left the villagers rattled, locking doors and eyeing strangers. Miss Jane Marple, however, was as steady as her knitting needles, her sharp mind weaving together clues like threads in a tapestry. Victor Langston, the polished art dealer in Rose Cottage, was no ordinary thief. She was sure of it. His blue-painted smudges, late-night walks, and cryptic paper of numbers pointed to a clever scheme. Now, Miss Marple was ready to turn the tables. She sat in her cozy cottage, the fire crackling, her knitting bag untouched. The scrap of paper, with its coded numbers, 14 to 3, 27 to 8, 9 to 1, lay on her table. A puzzle she was close to solving. Langston wasn't stealing for pocket change. He was after big prizes, and St. Mary Mead was his hunting ground. But hunters could be trapped, and Miss Marple knew just how to set the bait. Cherry, she called to her maid, who was dusting the mantel with a cheerful hum. I need you to do something for me. It's a bit of gossip, and you're just the girl to spread it. Cherry's eyes lit up. Gossip, Miss Marple. Oh, I'm good at that. What's the story? Miss Marple smiled, her voice soft but firm. Tell Mrs. Price at the post office, and anyone else who'll listen, that Mrs. Bantry's found a rare diamond necklace in her attic at Gossington Hall. Say it's a family heirloom, worth a fortune, but she's keeping it quiet for now. Make sure it sounds juicy. Cherry grinned, already halfway out the door. I'll have the whole village buzzing by noon. But why? Miss Marple, what's the game? No game, Cherry, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. Just a little test. She thought of a village trap years ago, when a rumor about hidden cash caught a greedy shopkeeper sneaking into a barn. Langston, she guessed, wouldn't resist a diamond necklace knot, with his nose for treasure. By lunchtime, the village was alive with the tale. Mrs. Price told the baker, who told the butcher, who told Miss Hartnell, and soon everyone was whispering about Mrs. Bantry's secret necklace. Miss Marple knew Langston would hear it. He seemed to hear everything. Like a fox catching the rustle of leaves, she headed to Gossington Hall, her walking stick tapping the lane. Mrs. Bantry was in her garden, pruning roses, her red scarf bright against the green. Jane, she called, waving. This village is mad with talk about my necklace. I haven't got one, you know that. Miss Marple's lips twitched. I know, Dolly. I started the rumor. I need your help to catch a thief. Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, then sparkled with mischief. You old fox. You think it's that, Langston, don't you? What's the plan? Miss Marple explained, her voice low. We'll make a fake necklace, something shiny enough to fool an expert. We'll say you're keeping it in the library safe at Gossington Hall. But the safe's lock is tricky, easy to open for someone clever. If Langston's our man, he'll try for it, and we'll be waiting. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. Jane, you're brilliant, like something out of one of Arthur's detective novels. I've got some old costume jewelry, glass beads that look like diamonds. Will that do? Perfect, Miss Marple said. She remembered a village fair where a fake ruby ring caught a thief who thought it was real. Langston, with his art dealer's eye, would know value. But greed could blind even the sharpest mind. They spent the afternoon in Gossington Hall's library, a grand room with tall bookshelves and a heavy safe in the corner. Mrs. Bantry dug through a dusty jewelry box, pulling out a string of sparkling beads that gleamed like real diamonds in the light. My aunt's costume piece, she said, grinning. Fooled plenty at parties. Miss Marple nodded, inspecting the necklace. It'll do nicely. Now, let's make sure the village knows it's in the safe and that the safe's lock is old and loose. She thought of Langston's leather case, marked with blue paint, and the coated paper from her garden. He was careful, but not careful enough. Mrs. Bantry spread the word at the tea shop, sighing loudly about her precious necklace locked in the rickety old safe. By evening, the story had legs, and Miss Marple was sure Langston would hear it. She pictured his smile, his quick hands, his late-night walks. He'd bitten that smaller bait, the brooch, the candelabra. A diamond necklace would be too tempting to resist. That evening, she sat with Raymond West, her nephew, in her cottage. He was sipping tea, his eyes bright with curiosity. Aunt Jane, you're setting a trap, aren't you? This necklace for Langston, right? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. It's a test, Raymond, like when we caught that poacher by leaving a fake pheasant in the woods. If Langston's honest, he'll do nothing. If he's not, he'll come sniffing. Raymond leaned forward. And then what? Call Inspector Slack. Not yet, she said. Slack's too quick to blame the wrong person. Like poor Ellen. We need proofs, something solid, like the paint on his cuff or that paper I found. She showed Raymond the scrap again. Its numbers stark, 14-3, 27-8, 9-1. Sir Henry says it's a tally sheet for stolen goods. Langston's not working alone, I think. Raymond whistled. You're building a case, Aunt Jane. Want me to watch Rose Cottage, see if he sneaks out? Miss Marple shook her head. No, Raymond, you stay clear. He's clever, and clever. Men notice watchers. But I'll need your help at the trap. She thought of Langston's torchlit walk by the vicarage, his blue paint, his questions about heirlooms. He was spinning a web, but she'd spin one tighter. The next day, Miss Marple visited the vicarage to check on Mrs. Clement, who was still mourning her candelabra. Jane, it's awful, Mrs. Clement said, pouring tea. First Dolly's brooch, now my silver, and Mr. Langston was so kind, offering to ask his art contacts about stolen goods. Do you think he could help? Miss Marple's lips twitched. He's certainly interested in valuables. She thought of a village swindler who'd offered to find lost items while selling them on the side. Langston's kindness was a mask, and she was ready to pull it off. She walked past Rose Cottage on her way home, her eyes sharp. Langston was outside, polishing his car, his leather case nearby. He waved, his smile as bright as ever. Miss Marple heard about Mrs. Ben's necklace, quite a find. Oh yes, she said, her voice sweet. A treasure, but safely locked away. For now. She watched his eyes flicker, just for a moment, and knew the bait was taken. He'd heard the rumor, and he was hooked. Back at her cottage, she called, Inspector Slack, her voice firm but polite. Inspector, I have a feeling about Gossington Hall. Could you keep an eye on it tomorrow night? Just a hunch, but I'd hate for another theft to happen. Slack grunted. A hunch, Miss Marple. I'm busy with Elon's case. But I'll send a constable, if it keeps you happy. It does, she said, hanging up. She didn't trust Slack to see the big picture, but a constable would do. She thought of the fake necklace, gleaming in the safe, and Langston's greedy eyes. He'd come, she was sure, like a moth to a flame. That evening, she sat with Mrs. Bantry at Gossington Hall, finalizing the plan. Dolly, tomorrow night's the village concert, Miss Marple said. Everyone will be there, and the hall will seem empty. Perfect for a thief to try his luck. Mrs. Bantry's eyes sparkled. Jane, you're wicked. I'll make sure the safe's lock looks loose. Arthur's got a knack for rigging things. And I'll tell everyone I'm at the concert, but I'll be hiding here with you. Miss Marple nodded. Good. We'll watch from the library shadows. If Langston comes, we'll catch him red-handed. She thought of a village boy caught stealing jam, his hands sticky with guilt. Langston's hands would be sticky too, and she'd be there to see it. As the village slept, Miss Marple sat by her window. The stars bright above St. Mary Mead. Her knitting lay still, her mind racing. The fake necklace was set, the trap ready. Langston thought he was the hunter, but hunters could become prey. She'd seen it before, with swindlers and cheats, and she'd see it again. Tomorrow night, the web would tighten, and Miss Marple would be holding the strings. Chapter 7. The night of the heist. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead was dark and starry, the village alive with the hum of the concert at the village hall. Laughter and music spilled from the open windows, where fiddles and a piano played cheerful tunes. Everyone was there. Mrs. Price, Miss Hartnell, the vicar, even young Ellen, who'd braved the gossip to sing in the choir. But at Gossington Hall, all was quiet, the grand house looming like a shadow. Miss Jane Marple knew it was the perfect night for a thief to strike hand. She was ready. She sat in the library of Gossington Hall, hidden in a corner behind a heavy curtain. Mrs. Bantry crouched beside her, her red scarf tucked away to avoid notice. The fake diamond necklace, its glass beads, sparkling like the real thing, sat in the safe across the room. The safe's lock was rigged to look loose, just as Miss Marple had planned. She'd spread the rumor of the necklace through Cherry, and the village had buzzed with it. Victor Langston, the charming art dealer, had surely heard. Miss Marple's sharp eyes had caught his flicker of greed when she'd mentioned it, and she knew he'd come. "Dolly," Miss Marple whispered, her voice soft as a breeze. "Keep still. He'll be here soon, if I'm right." Mrs. Banners' eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Jane, this is thrilling. Like one of Arthur's detective stories. You're sure it's Langston?" "As sure as I am of my knitting," Miss Marple said. She thought of the blue paint on his cuff, the coated paper in her garden, his late-night walks. Langston was no ordinary thief. He was a spider, spinning a web of thefts across St. Mary Mead. The brooch, the candelabra, and now this necklace. He couldn't resist the bait. The library was dark, lit only by a sliver of moonlight through the window. The safe stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar to tempt a thief. Miss Marple had told Inspector Slack to send a constable, but she'd also asked him to stay outside, hidden in the garden. Slack had grumbled, calling it a wild goose chase, but he'd send young Constable Reed, who was crouched behind a hedge with a lantern. Miss Marple's heart beat steady, her hands folded in her lap. She remembered a village trap years ago, when a fake purse left on a bench caught a pickpocket red-handed. Langston was cleverer, but greed made even clever men careless. She thought of his leather case, marked with blue paint, and the numbers 14-3, 27-8, 9-1 that Sir Henry Clithering said were a tally sheet. Tonight, she'd add a new number to his list. Caught. A faint creak broke the silence. Mrs. Bantry gripped Miss Marple's arm. Her breath quick. The library door eased open, and a shadow slipped inside. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite her age, caught the outline of a man tall, moving like a cat. It was Langston, his slick hair glinting in the moonlight, his leather case tucked under his arm. He paused, glancing around, then crept toward the safe. Mrs. Bantry whispered, "It's him. Jane, he's here." "Hush," Miss Marple murmured. She watched Langston kneel by the safe, his fingers quick and sure. He pulled a small tool from his Pokita lockpick, she guessed, like the ones a village burglar once used to raid sheds. The safe door creaked open, and Langston reached inside, pulling out the fake necklace. Its beads sparkled, and his smile flashed, greedy and sharp. "Now," Miss Marple whispered. She tapped Mrs. Bantry's hand, and they stepped from behind the curtain. "Mr. Langston," Miss Marple said, her voice clear and calm. "That's not yours." Langston froze, the necklace dangling from his hand. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard look. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but tight. "What a surprise. I was just checking the safe. Mrs. Bantry asked me to look at her valuables." Mrs. Bantry snorted, stepping forward. "I did no such thing. You're a thief, Mr. Langston, and we've caught you." Langston's eyes darted to the door, but before he could move, Constable Reed burst in, his lantern swinging. "Stay where you are," Reed shouted, his voice shaky but firm. "You're under arrest." Langston raised his hands, the necklace still in his grip. "This is a mistake," he said, his charm slipping back like a mask. "I found this safe open. Thought I'd secure it. I'm no thief." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "A fine story, Mr. Langston. But the paint on your cuff, the paper in my garden, your late-night walks, they tell a different tale." She stepped closer, her eyes sharp as needles. "You took Mrs. Bantry's brooch and the vicarage candelabra. This necklace was just the bait to catch you." Langston's jaw tightened, but he kept his smile. "You're a clever old lady, Miss Marple, but you've got no proof." "Oh, I think we do," she said. She nodded to Reed, who grabbed Langston's leather case. Inside, tucked among papers, was a small velvet pouch. Reed opened it, and out fell Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch, its blue stone gleaming. Mrs. Bantry gasped, clutching her chest. "My brooch," she cried. "You scoundrel." Reed snapped handcuffs on Langston, who glared, but said nothing. Miss Marple noticed the blue smudge on the pouch, matching the paint on his cuff. She thought of Sir Henry's story about thieves marking goods with paint. Langston's web was unraveling, just as she'd planned. That's Reed led Langston outside. Inspector Slack arrived, puffing from a run across the village. "What's this?" he barked, eyeing Langston. "Miss Marple, you said a hunch, not a full-blown arrest." "A hunch with proof," Miss Marple said, holding up the coated paper from her garden. "These numbers are his tally sheet, Inspector. I suspect you'll find the candelabra with his buyer if you check his contacts." Slack grunted, looking at Langston with new respect or suspicion. "Well, I'll be. You've done my job for me, Miss Marple." "Not quite," she said, her voice mild. "You'll need to find the rest of his loot. He's been busy, I think, beyond St. Mary Mead." The concert was still going strong, its music drifting across the village. Mrs. Bantry hugged Miss Marple, her eyes shining. "Jane, you're a marvel. How did you know he'd come tonight?" "Greed," Miss Marple said simply. "It's like a moth to a candle. I've seen it before, with that peddler who stole silver spoons, thinking no one noticed." She thought of Langston's smile, his quick hands, his overconfidence. He'd underestimated St. Mary Mead and her. As Reed took Langston to the police car, villagers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Price gasped. Miss Hartnell clutched her shawl, and young Ellen, free from suspicion, wiped tears of relief. The news spread like wildfire. Langston, the charming art dealer, was a thief, caught by Miss Marple's clever trap. Back in the library, Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, sipping tea from a flask Dolly had brought. "Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, "you're wasted in this village. You should be in Scotland Yard." Miss Marple chuckled, her knitting needles clicking again. "Oh, I'm happy here, Dolly. There's always a puzzle to solve, even in St. Mary Mead." She thought of the coated paper, the paint, Langston's downfall. It reminded her of a village boy caught stealing apples, tripped by his own greed. Langston was no different, just a bigger apple, a shinier prize. As the concert ended and villagers spilled into the night, Miss Marple walked home, her stick tapping the lane. The stars twinkled above, and St. Mary Mead felt peaceful again. But she knew the job wasn't done. Langston's buyers, his bigger scheme, they'd need unraveling. She'd tell Slack to check the paint, the numbers, the contacts. For now, though, the village was safe, and she'd sleep soundly, her trap sprung, her puzzle half solved. Chapter 8. Unmasking the Master Criminal. The morning after Victor Langston's arrest, St. Mary Mead was alive with chatter. The village hall, usually quiet, except for choir practices and tea parties, was packed to the rafters. Villagers crowded inside, their voices buzzing like bees in a jar. The thefts of Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch and the vicarage's silver candelabra had shaken the village, and Langston's capture at Gossington Hall, caught with a fake diamond necklace, was the talk of every shop and lane. Miss Jane Marple, the quiet spinster, with a mind sharp as a needle, had set the trap, and now she stood, ready to pull back the curtain on the thief's true face. The hall smelled of polished wood and tea, with chairs lined up in neat rows. Mrs. Bantry stood at the front, her red scarf bright, her face flushed with excitement. Inspector Slack, gruff as ever, was beside her, holding Langston's leather case, its blue smudge clear under the morning light. Constable Reed guarded the door, where Langston sat, handcuffed and silent, his polished charm replaced by a cold stare. The villagers, Mrs. Price, Miss Hartnell, the vicar. Young Ellen watched with wide eyes, waiting for answers. Miss Marple stood near the podium, her gray hat tilted, her knitting bag at her feet. She looked small and frail, but her eyes sparkled with quiet strength. Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands, silencing the crowd. "Everyone, settle down. Miss Marple's got something to say about our thief." "Go on, Jane, tell them." Miss Marple cleared her throat, her voice soft but clear. "Good morning, friends. St. Mary Mead's had a shock, but it's over now. Mr. Langston, our charming art dealer, isn't what he seems. He's a thief, a clever one, but not clever enough." A gasp rippled through the hall. Mrs. Price whispered, "A thief, but he was so polite." Miss Hartnell clutched her shawl, and Ellen, free from blame, looked relieved. Miss Marple held up the scrap of paper she'd found in her garden. Its numbers stark: 14-3, 27-8, 9-1. "This," she said, "is his tally sheet. A list of stolen goods, marked for his buyers. I found it near the vicarage. where he walked at night, planning his crimes. She paused, her eyes on Langston. He stared back, his jaw tight, but said nothing. She went on. The blue paint on, his cuff, his case, his shoes. It was an accident. It was a signal, like the chalk marks a burglar once used in this village to tag houses. Sir Henry Clithering, my friend from Scotland Yard, told me of thieves who marked their loot. Mr. Langston marked his with paint. The crowd murmured, and Inspector Slack nodded, looking almost impressed. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. He came to St. Mary Mead with a plan. He asked about heirlooms - Mrs. Bantry's brooch, the vicarage candelabra, knowing their value. He was at the fete when the brooch vanished, at the vicarage when the candelabra went missing, and last night he walked into a trap. Mrs. Bantry beamed, stepping forward. Jane's idea. We spread a story about a diamond necklace in my safe. Fake, mind you, but shiny enough to tempt him, and he fell for it, didn't he? The villagers clapped, and Langston's face darkened. Miss Marple raised a hand, quieting the room. He thought he could outsmart us, a sleepy village full of simple folk. But he forgot one thing. Even clever men make mistakes when they think no one's watching. Like the grocer's boy who stole sweets, caught because he left wrappers behind. She turned to Langston, her eyes sharp. You're not Victor Langston, are you? I had my nephew, Raymond West, ask in London. The real Victor Langston died years ago. You're Vincent Lyle, wanted in Paris, Rome, and London for stealing jewels and art. You thought St. Mary Mead would be easy pickings, but you underestimated a nosy old spinster. The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Mrs. Price called out, Vincent Lyle, a criminal. But he helped with the auction. Miss Hartnell shook her head, muttering about his charm. Langston Lyle finally spoke, his voice low and bitter. You're clever, Miss Marple, but you've got no proof beyond that necklace, and it's fake. Miss Marple smiled, sweet as sugar. Oh, but we have more. Inspector, show them. Slack opened the leather case, pulling out the velvet pouch. From last night, inside was Mrs. Bantry's sapphire brooch, its blue stone gleaming. The crowd gasped again, and Mrs. Bantry clapped her hands. My brooch, Jane. You're a marvel. Slack held up another itema, small silver box, etched with roses. Found this in his car this morning, he said. Matches the vicarage candelabra's pattern. We're searching for the candelabra now, with his buyers. Miss Marple nodded. The numbers on the paper 14 to 3, 27 to 8, 9 to 1 are likely his codes for items or buyers. Check his contacts, Inspector, and you'll find the rest. He wasn't alone. Thieves like him have networks, like the gang that robbed the manor years ago, caught because one left a note. Lyle's shoulders slumped, his charm gone. He looked smaller now, like a balloon losing air. Miss Marple thought of a village swindler who'd crumbled when his lies were exposed. Clever men, she knew, fell hardest when their pride tripped them. The villagers cheered, and Ellen ran to Miss Marple, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Miss Marple. They thought I took the candelabra, but you believed me. Miss Marple patted her hand. I know an honest face. Ellen, you're a good girl. She thought of young Tommy, blamed for stealing apples, until she found the real thief. Innocence suffered when thieves like Lyle roamed free. Inspector Slack cleared his throat, looking sheepish. Miss Marple, I owe you one. Thought you were meddling, but you've cracked this case wide open. No meddling, Inspector, she said, her eyes twinkling. Just noticing what's there. Like the postman who saw too many letters go missing. She glanced at Lyle, now led away by Constable Reed. His web was broken, his secret spilled. As the crowd spilled out, chattering about Lyle's downfall. Mrs. Bantry pulled Miss Marple aside. Jane, you're a wonder. How did you know it was him from the start? Little things, Miss Marple said. His paint, his questions, his walks. People show who they are. Dolly, if you watch, like that maid who fidgeted when she lied about the silver spoons. She thought of Lyle's overconfidence, his belief that a village couldn't catch him. That was his mistake, and her victory. The village hall emptied, and Miss Marple walked home, her stick tapping the lane. The sun was high, and St. Mary Mead sparkled, its peace restored for now. She knew Slack would dig into Lyle's network, find the candelabra, maybe more. Her trap had worked, but the puzzle wasn't fully solved. Lyle's buyers, his codes they'd need unraveling. But that was for tomorrow, that for now, she'd earned her tea. She thought of Raymond, who'd called London to check on Langston, and Cherry, who'd spread the necklace rumor like wildfire. They'd all played a part, but it was her eyes, her ears, her quiet watching that caught the spider in his web. St. Mary Mead was small, but it wasn't simple not with Miss Marple knitting by the window. Chapter 9. Justice and Titha's sun shone softly over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in a golden glow. The chaos of the past weeks, the stolen sapphire brooch, the missing silver candelabra, and the unmasking of Vincent Lyle, the so-called Victor Langston, had settled like dust after a storm. The village was calm again, its cottages snug, its lanes quiet. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking gently, her mind at ease. The master criminal was behind bars, and St. Mary Mead could breathe easy. Thanks to her, it was a crisp afternoon, a week after the dramatic scene at the village hall where Miss Marple had revealed Lyle's true identity. The village was still buzzing, but now, with pride instead of fear. Mrs. Bantry's brooch was back on her dress, sparkling as if it had never been gone. The vicarage candelabra, recovered from a shady dealer in London, stood proudly on Mrs. Clement's dining table again, and young Ellen, the maid, could hold her head high, free from Inspector Slack's unfair suspicions. Miss Marple sipped tea by her window, watching the village go by. Children played by the duck pond, and Mr. Green, the butcher, waved from his shop. It was the kind of day that made St. Mary Mead feel like a picture postcard. But Miss Marple knew peace was fragile, like a teacup on a wobbly shelf. She'd seen trouble come and go before, and she'd always be ready for the next puzzle. Cherry, her cheerful maid, bustled in with a tray of scones and jam. "Miss Marple, you're the talk of the village. Everyone's saying how you caught that Lyle fellow. Mrs. Price reckons you're cleverer than Sherlock Holmes." Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Sherlock's a fine fellow in books, Cherry, but I just notice things. Like that time Mrs. Hodges' silver spoon turned up in the peddler's cart." She thought of Lyle's blue paint, his coated paper, his greedy eyes. He'd been clever, but not clever enough. The door-knocker rapped, and Mrs. Bantry swept in, her red scarf flapping. "Jane, you marvel," she cried, plopping into an armchair. "The village can't stop talking about you, and my brooch, look at it, shining like new." She patted the sapphire pinned to her dress, its blue stone catching the light. "I'm glad it's back where it belongs, Dolly," Miss Marple said, pouring tea. "And the candelabra, safe and sound," Mrs. Bantry said. "Inspector Slack tracked it to a dealer in London, just like you said. They found a whole stash of stolen goods, jewels, silver, even paintings. Lyle was no small-time crook." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "He was Vincent Lyle, wanted across Europe. Sir Henry Clithering called this morning Scotland Yard's thrilled. They'd been chasing him for years." She thought of Lyle's polished charm, his leather case, the numbers 14-3, 27-8, 9-1. His tally sheet led them to his buyers. "A whole network, undone by a scrap of paper in my garden." Cherry sat down, her eyes wide. "A network, like a gang, in St. Mary Mead." "Not in St. Mary Mead," Miss Marple said, "but passing through. Lyle thought we were easy pickings, a quiet village, full of trusting folk. But he forgot that trust comes with eyes and ears." She remembered a village swindler who'd thought the same, caught when he bragged too loudly at the pub. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her tea untouched. "Jane, how did you know it was him?" "From the start, you had your eye on him." "Little things," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "His paint smudge, his questions about heirlooms, his late-night walks. They reminded me of people I've known, shopkeepers, peddlers, even a charming vicar once, who wasn't what he seemed. People show their true colors, Dolly, If you watch. Cherry grinned, spreading jam on a scone. You're like a hawk, Miss Marple. That fake necklace was a stroke of genius. How'd you think of it? Miss Marple smiled, sipping her tea. I've seen traps work before, Cherry. Like when we left a fake purse on a bench to catch a pickpocket. Lyle's greed was his weakness, just like that boy who couldn't resist apples. She thought of the fake necklace, its glass beads shining in the safe, and Lyle's eager hands reaching for it. He'd walked into her web, and she'd pulled the strings tight. Mrs. Bantry laughed, shaking her head. You're wasted here, Jane. Scotland Yard could use you. And poor Slacky's eating humble pie, admitting you solved his case. Inspector Slack's a good man, Miss Marple said, but he's too quick to judge. Like when he blamed Ellen. Poor girl. I just pointed him in the right direction. She thought of the coated paper, the blue paint, Lyle's overconfidence. He'd underestimated St. Mary Mead, thinking a nosy old spinster couldn't stop him. That was his biggest mistake. The fire crackled, and the three women sat in comfortable silence, the tea warm, the scones sweet. Outside, St. Mary Mead glowed, its peace restored. Miss Marple's mind wandered to other cases: small village thefts, a missing ring, a stolen bicycle. Each had taught her something about human nature, about the little signs people left behind. Lyle was no different, just a bigger puzzle, a shinier prize. Cherry broke the silence, her voice curious. Miss Marple, what happens to Lyle now? Will he go to prison? Oh yes, Miss Marple said. Scotland Yard's got enough on him, Jules Art. Years of thefts. He'll be locked away for a long time. She thought of Sir Henry's call, his excitement about Lyle's arrest. The coated paper had led to a warehouse in London, stuffed with stolen goods. The candelabra was just one piece. The brooch, another. Lyle's network was crumbling, and St. Mary Mead had started it. All. Mrs. Bantry sighed, leaning back. It's a relief, Jane, but I'll miss the excitement. This village hasn't been this lively since that actor ran off with the church funds. Miss Marple chuckled. There's always something, Dolly. Villagers are never as quiet as they seem. She thought of her roses, her knitting, her window on High Street. St. Mary Mead was her world, and she knew its rhythms, its gossip, its secrets, its heart. Lyle had thought he could dance through it, but she'd heard every step as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the village. Mrs. Bantry stood to leave. Jane, come to Gossington Hall tomorrow. We'll have a proper celebration. No fake necklaces this time. I'll be there, Miss Marple said, smiling. Cherry cleared the tea things, humming a tune from the concert. The cottage felt warm, safe, like a nest after a storm. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles clicking again, steady as a heartbeat. She thought of Lyle, handcuffed and silent, his charm useless now. He'd been a master criminal, weaving a web of thefts across cities and villages. But St. Mary Mead wasn't just any village. It had her. She remembered a village girl who'd lied about a stolen watch, caught because she couldn't stop fidgeting. Lyle's fidget was his paint, his numbers, his greed. Small things, but enough to unravel him. The stars came out, twinkling over St. Mary Mead. The church bells rang softly, and the village settled into sleep. Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting in her lap, her eyes on the quiet lane. The puzzle was solved, the thief caught, the treasures returned. Justice was served, as it always was when she watched and listened. But puzzles never ended. Not really. There'd be another one, someday, a lost ring, a sneaky stranger, a whisper of trouble, and she'd be ready, with her sharp eyes and quiet ways, knitting by the fire, guarding her village. For now, though, she'd enjoy her tea, her roses, and the peace of St. Mary Meadow she'd fought for, and won.